Welcome to the Canadian Party of Quebec podcast. Here are your hosts, Colin Standish and Murtis Fossey.
Hello, everyone. I'm Colin Standish, co-leader of the Canadian Party of Quebec. In this episode, the RLS, or Réseau Local de Service, in Memphremagog, here in the Eastern Townships, has announced a pilot project in which staff wear a badge, a yellow sunflower. For anyone who needs services in the English language, all they need to do is approach someone wearing the yellow sunflower and tell them they need help in English. Some say it's a great idea. Others have pointed out that the yellow flower is also a symbol for those with a hidden handicap who need help. The English language is, of course, not a hidden handicap, except perhaps in Quebec. Is this pilot project a good idea or an insult to those who speak what is still an official language in this country, Canada? Murtis Fossey is co-leader of the Canadian Party of Quebec. Murtis, what do you think?
Thanks, Colin. It's an interesting idea. We obviously, always want to encourage the use of both official languages, especially in a hospital setting. I think what people might be objecting to is the way that service's availability is being indicated in a sort of hidden manner rather than in a, overt and easy way of reading that those languages would be available to anyone speaking them or wishing to speak them or be spoken to. So, for instance, I was just at the Glen at the MUHC hospital the other day with my father, and on the PA system, they made an announcement that they needed the translation services in Spanish. And I thought that was really wonderful that they were making services available to people in the language of their choice, not just in the official languages of Canada. However, I think that given the recent rules in Quebec around language and so on, there's a sort of fear. And so I guess this is an attempt to get around the fear of speaking the, unforgivable English language in public or requesting that it be spoken in public for fear of offending someone. And so I guess from that point of view, I can see why people object to the use of a hidden measure to indicate their ability in English.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective, Murtis, because obviously you're a healthcare provider, a psychologist here in Quebec. I have mixed feelings on this. I am a townshipper, and in the Eastern Townships, there's often a lot of inability to access services in language of your choice. Obviously, Montreal has a great diversity of different languages. In the townships, to receive English language services is often a near impossibility in government-run clinics or private sector clinics. So, to have some sort of way that people could access this in a coherent way, I'm for that. But it also feels very othering, something like, instead of it just being ingrained into the administrative structure of an institution, because I know when I go to the hospital, I've often had to ask 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times every person I interact with, oh, can you speak to me in English? Thank you. Okay, no, can you please find someone? And I've had people tell me off sometimes, oh, I'm going to speak French. Why do you want service, et cetera? And it can become an unfortunate situation versus you indicate from the get-go and it becomes a smooth process. So I have mixed feelings, once again, to offer English speakers in the Eastern Townships who have lower incomes than Francophones, who have less access to social services. Also, Murtis, you might find this interesting, there's also a feminization of poverty in the townships. Over 50% of women in the townships are out of the workforce, partly because they take care of relatives who are ill because they can't access services. So 51% of women, the last stats I've seen in the English-speaking community, are not, gainfully employed. They're certainly, working very hard to take care of their relatives, but not earning income from it, versus only 33% of Francophones in the Eastern Townships and have less access to social services to boot. So once again, I'm of mixed feelings on this, but I think I think it highlights the issues of why is this necessary? People aren't getting services in the language of their choice. There isn't a coherent administrative structure for this. And also, let's talk about facts. English speakers in Quebec have lower socioeconomic status that leads to worse healthcare outcomes for them over time, and it's detrimental to their quality of life.
That's a really interesting point you bring up, Colin. I just want to make sure I understand correctly. So you're saying that if you're English speaking and you're a woman, you're more likely to not be working, gainfully employed, because you're taking care of somebody else who can't receive services in English unless you provide them?
That is correct. So partly it's not solely that, but caregivers, that is part of it, that people in the townships too will not go to CLSCs or different administrative structures people are reticent post-quiet revolution to access those services. I grew up in an environment like that where it's, there's a rejection, certainly in the townships, of administrative structures that are seen as discriminatory, I'll be frank, towards English speakers. So people withdraw from employment, from labor markets, leave Quebec. And often, yeah, people that need sophisticated or complex healthcare. I know my own sister was deeply disabled. She passed away 19 years ago, and it certainly was very challenging for my family. My mother worked full time, or even more than that, alongside having caregivers at home. But and so I know what it feels like personally, though my mother kept in the workforce. But and as well, English speakers in the townships earn $4,000 less a year than a francophone, same age and education, when you control for all other relevant factors. So sorry, I'm going on a bit, but it really is shocking. And people don't always realize that the socioeconomic discrimination towards Anglophones, particularly in the townships, but exists throughout this entire province, it leads to much less quality of life over time.
It's so terrible. I feel like, these people are basically not getting access to the services that they need, so much so that they've completely given up. I mean, I'm not even sure that this sunflower will even address that problem, because if people aren't even seeking out the services because they assume that they won't get them, there's nobody who's even going to see the sunflower to get the help in English anyway. This is appalling.
That is correct. So there's that withdrawal, and I've noticed that in my own life, and and I have a little story to tell that that in the township, certainly. So I'm making it very township specific, but it's interesting how the dynamic between Montreal, people are often very focused on civil rights and human rights, and obviously diversity. In the townships, often it's bread and butter issues. Can I get access at the municipal, provincial, and federal level of a service in the language of my choice? And the answer is often no, unfortunately. And so, but in the townships, we have a very organic and natural community of built-in respect for each other. So often people don't necessarily respect the law. Bill 101 is not applied to signs, as I notice when I go to Montreal. It's very, I don't say well applied, as I don't think any application is good. But, once again, I can see the law is applied coherently. But in the townships, sometimes signs are only in English on storefronts, or English and French stop signs are quite ubiquitous. And so anyway, I digress. But in the townships, I was going to tell a little story. I think I mentioned to you before that I was 13 years old. I had appendicitis. I was misdiagnosed by a school nurse, nearly died, nearly succumbed to it. But I was rushed into the hospital, and at 3 a.m. I had my appendix removed. And I remember, I don't remember that much. I think I was on pretty heavy anesthetics at the time, but I do remember it quite vividly, on the operating table, with the surgeon speaking to me in English, and the nurse is speaking in French, and I go in between the language, both languages. And the surgeon said, "Hey, speak to him in English. He's an Anglophone, whatever." And the nurse said, "Oh, he speaks such good French, etc." And they're like, "What do you want?" And I was like, "Just get it out of me. I don't care." And I remember they were arguing and yelling at each other, the nurses and surgeons, over my head with scalpels and masks on, as I was counting back from 10 with the gas, And I remember at that, young age, that the language debate was so absurd that it delayed a life-saving operation for a young boy who was myself. So, and that was a profound formative experience alongside many others that has brought me to where I am today. So I wanted to share that with you, Murtis, and our listeners too, our members of the CaPQ and the wider public here in the province of Quebec.
I mean, I think it's clear that the access problems are not going to get any better if we don't address the language laws that are causing these problems in the first place. And the good news is that at the CaPQ, we fully and totally and completely, absolutely ready to get rid of these and scrap these horrible laws, so that people can just get informed consent, give informed consent, receive the services, and gain access to all of the most basic services that they all should have a right to and to have complete access to. And fortunately, we're here to really come up with an actual solution to that problem, and not just a symbol like a pin of a flower.
Yeah, completely agree, Murtis. And obviously, that you offer mental health services and have the only or one of the few walk-in mental health clinics in the province of Quebec. So you have taken upon yourself as a service provider. I believe you work in the private industry, maybe billing to the government or insurance, or people pay on their own. I'm not sure we have never talked about your business operations necessarily, but you have a very innovative service model, and and you do so on your own volition, which is very, very impressive. And But certainly the government fails with offering even marginal services for anyone, regardless of language. This hinders all Quebecers. But there's huge administrative gaps. And I think you highlighted something else, informed consent, that I remember in law school looking at the civil code, that, it's so critical, right, to be able to give informed consent for medical procedures and medical ethics. So it's a very tantalizing subject. I think we'll have to come back to it another time, as it seems to be all the time we have. Murtis, do you have any final thoughts for us today?
I do not have any final thoughts. It's been a great discussion.
Well, thank you, Murtis, so much for sharing your knowledge, your expertise with us. Thanks for joining us, everybody. On our next episode, if Canada is divisible, so is Quebec. Keith Henderson joins us to talk about the proposed 11th province. Until then, I'm Colin Standish.
And I'm Martise Fossey. Thanks for tuning in.
The Canadian Party of Quebec is a principled federalist voice for the future of Quebec. For more information, visit CanadianPartyQuebec.ca.